On today's show, July is coming to an end, and we get into your mailbag questions as well as the 15th roster spot being open, EuroBasket, and much more. And it's all coming up right now.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 2031 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Tuesday evening into Wednesday. Today's podcast is brought to you by the folks at Monarch Money. Take control of your finances right now with the folks at Monarch Money and use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for half off your first year. I also want to encourage you at the top of the show, as I always do, to make Locked On Hawks your first listen each and every day. Check us out and subscribe to the podcast anywhere you find your podcast. That includes Apple and Spotify on the audio side. We are also on YouTube, so please like this video as you're watching it and tell your friends about the podcast. And today, I'll be diving into all kinds of mailbag-driven topics, as well as a little bit of a look at the open roster spot that the Hawks still have here at the end of July. And unless something happens news-wise, this will be the last show that posts in the month of July, so kind of a wrap-up of the month as well. At the end of the show, a little bit of a look ahead to EuroBasket, where the Hawks will have a lot of involvement in that tournament that's starting about 4 weeks from now across the pond. But with that said, it's been a busy week already. We had a Moge deep dive player capsule with my friend Glenn Willis joining me on Sunday evening into Monday. Before that, I had Dane Moore on the podcast talking about Nickeil Alexander-Walker. So we're not slowing down really at all. Please subscribe, tell your friends, and we'll dive in now to your mailbag questions to drive today's mailbag-driven show. So, first question comes from Donovan, who says, are the Hawks ever going to sign a 15th player, or will they wait until training camp? Also, who is even out there if Horford signs with the Warriors? So, multi-pronged question here, but the real answer is TBD on what they're going to do with that last roster spot. Every so often, I've done a check-in on this. This is kind of the nature of the beast right now. It's a very quiet time in the league. The entire league basically has ground to a halt transaction-wise. There's just very, very little happening player movement-wise in the last 2 or 3 weeks. Honestly, it's the dead period for sure. Vacations are happening, all of that. As I'll get into in a second, there's still some names available that are pretty interesting to me for the Hawks, but it's also a waiting game for a lot of players. They don't have to sign anyone else if you're the Hawks. They can go into the season right now with their current roster. They have 14 guys signed to full contracts. At least 13 plus the reported signing of Caleb Houston. Plus they have 3 two-ways, and they could be totally fine with those 17 players. And for me, there's still a lot of guys that I would certainly offer the minimum to as the Hawks. I did a look at the cap stuff last week about the Hawks situation. They can offer the minimum to anybody right now and be under the cap and under the tax line, which is the most important thing right now financially for Atlanta. But more importantly than that, even perhaps, it's worth reminding everyone, it is a two-way street. A lot of players are being, I would say, justifiably picky right now, because they can be. If, let's say, for instance, you pick your favorite player that's available right now. If all that's available to them is the minimum, they can kind of be choosy. What spot do you want to go to? What do you value? Certain guys might value the chance to play on a winning team more. Other guys might choose the chance to play more to set themselves up for the future. There are varying things here. And also some guys might get a little bit more money some other places, perhaps. So the Hawks have I would say one of the quote unquote challenges for the Hawks right now is they have a pretty deep roster. And if you're a player at a position where you might have 2 or 3 guys in front of you, you might not want to choose Atlanta first at that spot. For instance, if you're a backup center right now, pick your favorite guy, Thomas Bryant, Precious Achiuwa, whoever it's going to be. Would you want to choose a team where you kind of need an injury to be able to play regularly? Maybe not. So anyway, holding pattern is happening now, but I wanted to give you a quick list, not comprehensive, but still a bunch of names. Not saying that I would sign all of these guys, just kind of giving you a good idea of who's still available on the market as of July 29th and July 30th, kind of in 3 groups. There are a bunch of guards available, either point guards or kind of combo guard types. Malcolm Brogdon is available. D'Anthony Melton, a long favorite of this podcast. Monty Morris, my actual favorite, DeLon Wright. Cam Payne is available. Russell Westbrook's available. Corey Joseph, Alfred Payton, Shake Milton, Jaden Springer, a defense first option. Jared Butler, who I've always liked quite a bit. Markelle Fultz, and Seth Curry, more of a shooter. That's kind of that's a dozen guys that are guards. They're still available. More, wings or maybe shooting guard size at least. Amir Coffey, Alec Burks, Landry Shamet, Torrey Craig, Gary Payton II, Delano Banton, Cody Martin, Taylor Horton Tucker, and BJ Boston are all still available as well. And then bigs, either, centers or at least combo bigs. Al Horford, obviously the most prominent name. Precious Achua, Chris Boucher, Trey Lyles, Thomas Bryant, Ben Simmons is available. Bismack Biyombo, DeAndre Jordan, Charles Bassey, old friend Alex Len, Bol, Taj Gibson, and Tristan Thompson. So that's like, I don't know, 35, 40 names I just read. And again, I would not sign all these guys. For example, like I wouldn't give the minimum if I didn't have a choice to all these guys. But like some guys, I would love to have on the minimum. For example, Malcolm Brogdon, instantly would sign him for the minimum. D'Anthony Melton, same thing. Money Morris, probably would give him the minimum. Honestly, DeLon Wright, I've always loved. Go ahead and sign DeLon if you want to at the guard spot. Amir Coffey, I know the Hawks don't really have a huge need there, but certainly would offer that to him. Landry Shamet, guy I would give that deal to. Horford's obviously a no-brainer. Precious Achua, Chris Boucher, like guys that I would certainly say, hey, here's the minimum. Take it or leave it if you want to. Hopefully you take it, etc. But anyway, I could make coherent arguments for them to sign another guard, another wing, or another big if you ask me to do that. Other than Horford, I would say some of the better players overall are perimeter guys. Brogdon, Melton, Coffey. Those guys are probably better than a lot of the other players available. I think most people that I talk to and hear from refer to third center as kind of the biggest need for Atlanta, at least one of them. I know backup point guard has always been a contentious thing right now for Hawks fans, but they have Keaton Wallace on the two-way. They have Buffkin. They have a bunch of guys there. I would say, though, they don't have a glaring need in the way that some other teams might right now, especially if, and I think this is probably the case, the Hawks are comfortable with Mo Gay playing center. Again, I talked about Mo Gay extensively with Glenn Willis just 2 days ago on this show, so listen to that conversation. But certainly Mo is the third center right now. I'm pretty confident in that on the current roster. So all that said, I have a follow-up question from Sebastian on this same topic. So Sebastian says, he basically asked the same question that I just answered, but he went on to ask in the second part, how confident would you be in Mo Gay and Asa Newell being the fourth and fifth bigs on the team, knowing that rookies are not good and should be expected to fill important roles on winning teams? So the answer is not overly confident, but not totally insane to roll with this, is what I would say. Like on nights when Okongwu and Porzingis are both healthy, those two guys will likely play all 48 minutes at center. That's pretty obvious, but I just want to say that out loud. If one of those guys is out, the other one's going to play a lot. And I think Mo Gay can handle 16 to 20 minutes of backup center play on those nights right now. I wouldn't probably want to ask Asa Newell to do that kind of prominent role early in his rookie season, probably. He's more of a combo big still. I think Mo's defense is good enough where you can kind of rely on that. The argument against confidence in the current setup, I would say, is what happens if Okongwu or Porzingis are both out at the same time, or if one of them is out for like a month or two. Then it's a lot more challenging, and you might want to have a safer option, even behind Mo Gay. Like you might want to have Precious Achua or Thomas Bryant or somebody like that to kind of like just fill some minutes for you if you get a long-term injury or both those guys roll and ankle at the same time. Just last season, keep that in mind. Last year, things got bad for the Hawks defensively, not only because of this, but Jalen was already out. Then they had both Capella and Nance out at the same time. And that led you to a situation where now you're playing your fourth or fifth center and you don't have your starting power forward. Now that wouldn't always happen. That's not likely to happen, but you want to plan for contingency scenarios. Things happen. Injuries happen in the NBA. You cannot bank on 5, 6, 7, 8 guys playing the whole season. You have to, your 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th guys matter a lot. So all that said, if this team was like, more moderate expectations this year, it wouldn't matter as much. This is a team that's trying to win, like really win this year. And other than a Trae Young injury, which is always the case for star players, like, Trae being injured is like the worst case scenario for all the things. The most perilous like downside area is probably center depth right now. Because again, if you get an injury to Jalen or Ricochet, you're better set up now than you were before to handle that with your depth and what you've added to the roster. Trae is irreplaceable, but if you get both your centers to go down, that's going to be problematic. Again, you don't want to bank on that. And look, it's funny, the only guy that would fix like a real, like clearly with the only player available right now on the market, other than the guys who are restricted, who the Hawks have no mechanism of signing. So in case you're wondering why I'm not talking about those guys, like your Kumingas, Giddies. Those guys are not attainable for the Hawks. They're just not in any actual mechanism. The only player available right now that I am 100% confident would play on opening night if he signed is Horford. Do I think like Brogdon would probably play opening night? Yeah, I do. But like Horford would be the only player on this list that's like a lock to play opening night for the Hawks, which means you're signing any of these guys, you're signing depth pieces. And just for the record, the consensus still seems to be that the Warriors are just waiting for Kuminga news to drop, basically to go ahead and sign Horford and DeAnthony Melton officially. So I'm assuming it's kind of a long shot right now. Not impossible, but kind of a long shot. Everybody else, depth, and nothing wrong with that. But certainly there's not. I understand everyone's itching to have this just like news drop, have the hole filled, know what the roster is going to be. But in the meantime, like the Hawks, and I think players, again, in particular, the players don't have the same level of urgency right now as fans do. If it gets to be mid-September and your roster and that 15 spots open, it might be a team choice that it's still open rather than, just the market. Right now, it's kind of the market, I think, dictating things. And again, there is that scenario where the Hawks just kind of roll with 14 and have that flexibility, a little bit of room under the tax line, roster space, all that going into camp. But we'll get into that more if we need to later on this summer. All right, more questions to come from you, the listeners and viewers of this podcast, in just one moment. This was brought to you by Monarch Money. Do you ever wish that managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it absolutely can feel easier, whether growing your savings or planning a big purchase. Monarch Money puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. And at Monarch Money, they're just more than just a budgeting app. It's instead a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, your investments, and your spending in one place. On top of managing your money, you're also building wealth. We all want to do that, obviously. And if you're sharing finances with somebody else, Monarch helps you stay in the same page with ease with that person. And for me, tracking spending with Monarch Money made an immediate difference right away, particularly when it came to how I spend money on food and subscriptions. Getting that cleaned up was so huge and giving me savings of money, honestly, and having everything in one place also made it very much easier to manage all of my finances, again, in one place. Take control of your finances right now with Monarch Money and use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for half off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. The code is LOCKEDONNBA for half off your first year. All right, a question from Brennan, who says, what do you think of what Brian Windhorst said on the Hoop Collective podcast about Trae and a max extension? So I'm going to keep this short intentionally. I did like a 15-minute full breakdown of Trae extension updates, factors, all of that about 8 or 9 days ago in this space. So listen to that podcast for more of this big picture stuff. But this is a little bit of a new thing. For the record, I'm a listener of the Hoop Collective podcast at ESPN. I enjoy it. I am friends with Tim Bontemps. I would say that. I know the other two guys less well, but certainly have met them both. I recommend listening to the full context of this discussion. But Wendy gave a pretty direct quote that made the rounds a little bit on Hawks Twitter. And after he said that Trae's extension talks were a thing to watch with the Hawks, which is very obvious, he said, and I quote, "They're not going to give him a max extension," end quote. Now, for some more context, about a week ago, Wendy does these like threads Q&As, and he said he would, quote, "be surprised if Trae got the max." That is different than saying he definitely won't, which is what the first quote was. Now, it's a podcast versus writing. On a podcast, you might say something that might sound more definitive than it actually is. If you write it, your standard's a little bit higher for me. But still, it's a podcast. He put it out there. He said it. Keep that in mind. He also noted on that Threads Q&A, the Hawks and Trae have been working together this summer. That makes sense. And that, quote, "there's probably a deal to be made," end quote. But Wendy said, this is his own belief, that the number of full 30%, 35% max contracts are probably going to go down with the new April system in place. I agree with that sentiment, for the record. That's what he said. It was not like reporting, just kind of his read on the situation. And as far as my read on this, for what it's worth, I wouldn't be as definitive as that podcast quote was from Windhorst. Part of that is that things can change, honestly. I have learned that there is almost more uncertainty on any direction than you might think with all this stuff. And part of it also is that I know of at least an instance or two instances in the past where Hawks ownership, Tony Ressler, kind of got involved, and a deal that was like not what the Hawks wanted to do front office wise, like as far as a number is concerned, the deal went a little bit higher because Tony said, "make this happen." And I'm not saying it's going to happen with Trae, but that the combination of the uncertainty, ownership involvement, Trae being a big name, all those things, like I would just go to non-zero chance. Like when he said 0%, well, he didn't say that, but he said they're not going to. I wouldn't be that definitive. That's what I would say. I do, though, generally agree that I don't think the Hawks front office right now wants to give Trae the full 4-year, $229 million max contract. If you ask me to predict right now whether they will do that or not, like if the question is, will they give him the 4-year full max? My educated guess is no, but I'm not definitive on that. Again, nothing to be alarmed about right now. Like I would point back to the long segment I did last week again, but between the full market on Trae, the cost of his max, his age, the dynamics in play, his player option, the Hawks having his bird rights, all those things, I think the best course of action for the Hawks would be to make an offer to Trae. That's a competitive offer right now, but to stop short of giving him the full 4-year max a year in advance. I would not make that offer right now to Trae if it was me. It wouldn't bother me if they did. It's not crazy to do that, but I think if you go into all the dynamics in play, and the Hawks have some other factors in play, like next year, again, player option is there for you. They have his bird rights. Not extending him now. This is very important, and I've seen people talk about this like very kind of strangely. Not extending him this summer does not mean he's going to leave. It doesn't. Now, it does mean that he can opt out at the end of the season and leave. It does mean that. It does not mean he will do that. Based on right now, even if you told me right now for sure that the Hawks will not extend Trae between now and the season, I would still say he is likely to be a Hawk the following season. Likely. Not for sure, but likely. Keep that in mind, all of that. And again, the Hawks have the hammer next summer if they want to keep him. They can outbid anybody if they want to. So again, overall, no reason to panic about this. I would say I have heard the same sentiment that Wendy is passing along and reporting about the Hawks being unlikely to give Trae the full 4-year. Again, I'm stressing that on purpose. An extension, very much possible. The 4-year, 229, everything kitchen sink contract, I don't think it's been offered, because if it was offered, Trae would take it. Now, the Hawks could up their offer. That's definitely possible, but that's my educated read, is that if the Hawks were offering the 4-year full max to Trae right now, they would have already announced the deal. Trae would take it, and that would be the end of it. That hasn't happened yet, which means the Hawks are short of that, and then we'll see at this point in time. All right, it's not only one question. I got a bunch of questions about this, but various questions came in about offseason grades that the Hawks have received, and they're starting to make the rounds on the internet. It's that time of year where like things are slow and outlets are doing their grades because it's like, hey, this is a natural topic. The biggest one that I got questions about in a good way was ESPN's Kevin Pelton, who was on the show long ago. He'll probably be on the show again in the future. He gave the Hawks an A in his offseason grades, and it was on the front page of ESPN. Prominent story. Pelton's great. Only one other team in the league got an A, and it was Houston, who made the KD trade, all that stuff. The Hawks were the only team in the East that got an A from Pelton. And he noted, quote, that the Hawks vaulted themselves into the ranks of legit East threats, end quote. So that is a high praise, I would say, from Pelton. I agree with it. For the record, I would give them the same grade. My friends Nate Duncan and Daniel LaRue on their podcast, Dunked On Prime, were similar. One gave them an A, the other one an A+ on their podcast. Obviously, I spent a lot of time in the last month talking about what the Hawks have done and will do. Generally, I agree with the grade. Again, I think they had an A offseason. That does not guarantee anything beyond that, but I loved what they did. And it's kind of a two-pronged read on why they're getting such great marks around the league. Number one is what they did in the short term to improve the roster. Most prominently, getting Porzingis, getting Alexander Walker, both of which are on good, favorable returns. So basically, getting Porzingis for a very low asset cost of only 2 role players, one of which was overpaid on his deal, and Terrence Mann, and a late first rounder for Porzingis. That's a great transaction. It's not like an absolute grand slam, but it's one that everyone I talk to is like, as long as he's going to play, like, you go ahead and do that. Then Alexander Walker, same thing. Like, he's not a max player, but you got him for basically the mid-level for 4 years. And he was one of the best players available in free agency. He fits well. He defends, pairs well with Trae, can shoot it, all those things. It makes total sense. Like the move. So those two things, plus a big-time shooter in Luke Kennard, 1-year deal, low risk, like that as well. And then the other side of things, that's one prong. The second prong is, of course, the one thing that basically literally everyone agrees on in the entire NBA right now, which is that the Hawks got a fantastic trade done with the Pelicans at the trade deadline, at the draft. even if New Orleans is better than expected, it is still a trade that I cannot find a single person who would not have done it for the Hawks. And I'm not kidding about that around the league. Executives, agents, scouts, media, like everyone, short of basically everyone other than Joe Dudemar's would have done it for the Hawks. It's crazy, and that's what happened. So it was one of the bigger talking points for 10 days in Vegas, which is kind of crazy. I know it's an unprotected pick, but for that to be like that big of a story coming out of the draft when it didn't involve a top 5 pick, yet it might next year, but it didn't have a big name attached to it. But it was that crazy of a transaction. So all that said, if I was grading the Hawks, like it would definitely be an A or an A plus. Like it's up there. I love the offseason. I don't really do that kind of praise a lot, but it's warranted in this case. I think the Hawks nailed it. Now you could quibble with other things. Again, to go back to the beginning of this conversation on the podcast, could they use another center? Yeah, in my opinion, they could. Are they 100% settled at back at point guard? No, but you can't bat 1,000 necessarily. It's hard to do that. And the big stuff, which basically the 3 big things that the Hawks have done this summer were Porzingis, Alexander Walker, and the draft day trade. All 3 of those were deals that I would have done earnestly. And the draft day trade is an actual grand slam. So all those, throw that in the pot. I like Kennard. The other stuff, Ace and Newell is obviously a TBD, but a pick that I thought was totally reasonable. Nothing the Hawks have done this summer, and this is not usually the case. Nothing they've done this summer has gotten me like, oh, I don't like that. Nothing. I've either liked it or loved it with the Hawks this summer. Even their 2 ways, like Jacob Toppin, Keaton Wallace, Eli Njai, like I'm good on those guys. Caleb Houston, good on that. Like they're having a great summer. Again, does not guarantee anything at all, but I like it a lot. So does Pelton. So does other, national outlets, Nate Duncan, etc. The grades are coming in. I agree with them. And again, just take it in. I know it's weird for Hawks fans to get praise nationally, but they have deserved it so far this summer. All right, more to come in a second after a word from our partners. Today's show is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. It's time to fuel up and turn it up with 5 Hour Energy Transfusion. It brings the bold grape and ginger lime flavor of your favorite golf drink, minus the alcohol, into a quick, energizing shot. Whether you're sinking birdies or making memories with friends, this one's a hole-in-one for your energy game. Let's be honest, some days on the course or off the course, you just need that extra boost to stay sharp and energized. For me, as a pretty terrible golfer, I am playing golf to have fun with my friends, and if I hit a real shot or 2 along the way, that is good enough to keep me coming back to the game. But really, golf is all about great times with great people, and good flavors, of course, on top of that. And the grape ginger lime flavor gives you the best parts of the clubhouse go-to without chasing down the beverage cart when you actually want to do that. If you go to 5hourenergy.com, that's 5hourenergy.com, the number 5hourenergy.com, and use that promo code. It is Locked On Golf. The promo code is Locked On Golf. 20% off your order if you use that code at 5hourenergy.com. The offer is only valid until September 30th on one order. It cannot be used with other promotions. The code is also not good on subscription orders. Whether you're meeting up with friends or trying to turn 18 holes into 36 holes, get the energizing boost you need right now to power through. Order transfusion-flavored 5 Hour Energy shots today. All right, one more question from Valentine, who says, there are reports that the Hawks were involved with Marcus Smart. Do you know more about that? And what would that have looked like? So I can't remember if I talked about this on the podcast or not. Maybe it's Patreon. I'm not sure. But early in the summer, there was some buzz about Marcus Smart and the Hawks when he was still in Washington. But this week, or maybe the last couple of days, Jake Fisher, good friend of the podcast, mentioned the Hawks on a Bleacher Report stream as one of the teams that was in on Smart prior to his buyout in Washington. And then Mark Stein, who works with Jake, also wrote that Atlanta was considered taking Smart into their trade exception at one point this summer. What I would add is that I know the Hawks talked to Washington about Smart. It was not the first priority with the trade exception that ended up being what they used with Nickeil Alexander-Walker. It also would have required, on the Hawks side, the Wizards sending something along with him. So they were not going to just take Marcus Smart for nothing. They wanted something attached to Marcus Smart to take him into that exception. And look, Smart obviously could have helped Atlanta. And again, this is a world without Nickeil Alexander-Walker. So he would have been basically in that role instead of Nickeil, which I think the Hawks would prefer, and obviously did prefer Nickeil in this situation. But overall, I would say not a huge deal. This is part of the usual course of business where teams are always talking more than you might think that they are about all kinds of things. Smart was available. The Hawks actually talked to Washington at one point about something else too. Like I heard that they were in the Terrence Mann, basically dump discussion. There was a world in which I heard at one point maybe they would send Mann for Smart and kind of a machinations of a deal like that. Not exactly that, but there's stuff in the water. Does it matter now? No, obviously, but they had some interest from what I heard about Marcus Smart. For the record, someone else asked me this, like, could the Hawks have signed him once he was bought out by Washington? Yes, he could have, but he got more than the minimum from the Lakers, and that's a bigger role. So I think he would have taken that offer from what the Hawks could offer him. But yes, there's a world in which Smart could have been on the Hawks, but it probably would have been a world without Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and the Hawks obviously preferred Nickeil, as they should have at this point. All right, last thing on the show today. Not really a question, but there's some EuroBasket news in the last few days. If you don't know, that's kind of the European Championships of basketball. It'll be happening later on this summer. We discussed Porzingis and Ricochet gearing up to play for Latvia and France already, respectively. Those guys are going to be playing on the rosters, etc. Also, KP gave an interview recently where he actually said he's feeling fantastic physically. That's encouraging to see and hear. There are also photos and videos. I know Ricochet was with Ryan Schmidt, Hawks assistant coach, this week, and he looks bigger and stronger and ready to go. You love to see that if you're the Hawks, obviously going into year 2. But there was also 2 more guys on the Hawks who are on the preliminary rosters for their countries later on this summer. Vít Krejci is the only active NBA player for the Czech Republic. So he's going to be on that team almost certainly. He's a headliner there. He'll have the ball in his hands, all that fun stuff. Then Eli Njai is actually on Spain's roster. That one I'm skeptical of a little bit, that he would even make the team. He might make it at the end, but he won't play, I don't think, if I had to guess. But still, no matter what, good experience for him to be around the team all summer long. Obviously, learning environment for him as a guy who's still very young, but like to see that as well. The other guy who was at least on the borderline was Nikola Juricic. He is not actually on Serbia's roster right now. My pal Kevin Chenard of Hawks.com went and found a translation of some comments made by the Serbian coach that Juricic is part of the future in Serbia of his basketball program. And they actually thought about taking him on the roster, but they had some experienced guys at his position, wanted to give him some time off after he was in America all year long. Last year, had the injury, all that stuff. So not really a snub. Like, I don't think he would have played either way, but he's the only guy that was kind of like in consideration. But a lot of stuff to watch if you are a Hawks fan and want to just have some basketball to Jones on basically between now and the season. The actual games don't begin until August 27th. So, like, I don't know, 4 weeks from now, but there'll be some tune-up games, exhibitions already happening now in some respects before the event. So I won't do like full coverage, like game by game coverage, but certainly we'll be watching. I'll have observations about Porzingis, about Krejci, about Ricochet, Njai if he plays, and it'll be a lot of fun to kind of dive in a little bit to the basketball later on this summer. It's a non-Olympic year, but certainly there is stuff to watch. And for me and for everybody else, it's 2-pronged headliners. Porzingis, his first action since he had the mystery illness last year. You want to see him for sure. And the Ricochet will get attention. If he's playing for France, coming off of a rookie season that was strong, looking bigger, looking more physical, Hawks fans will be excited about that, and I would be as well. All right. That's all I have on today's podcast. Please subscribe to Locked on Hawks anywhere you find your podcasts. That's huge. I know people, it's kind of the doldrums right now. It's sicko season. I know that. But if you have Hawks fan friends in your life, share the podcast with them. If they find us now, they might stick around into the season. We'll be building back up, of course, to 5 days a week. In the meantime, I've said this before, I'll say it again. We're probably going to be around 3 times a week for the rest of the summer until things get heated up in like September, October. But in the meantime, we'll always be here. If there's news, I'll cover it. Player capsules with Glenn Willis. I'll have interviews about draft stuff and other teams, and the Pelicans will be a story all year long for the Hawks, all that fun stuff. So just keep it locked here. Subscribe, rate, review. I appreciate everyone listening and watching as always. If you want to follow the show on Twitter/X, it's at Locked on Hawks. Follow me there at BT Rowland. Also follow my Blue Sky at BT Rowland. And I also do some non-podcast coverage of the Hawks at patreon.com/BT Rowland. Everybody, thank you for being here. As always, enjoy your Wednesday, Thursday, etc. I'll have at least one more show later on this week, and we'll see you all next time.